When you see conflict and polarization, you don't have to see it like fire on the ground, you have to put it down or things like that. But rather you can harness the energy, you can drill and see the oil under the fire on the ground and see it as opportunities for co-creation.
Hi, we're here with Audrey Tang today at Harvard Business School's Institute for Business and Global Society. Audrey went from tech expert and political activist to once occupying Taiwan's parliament to being Taiwan's first digital minister in 2016. Audrey, hello. Thank you for being here.
Very happy to be here.
You became Taiwan's first digital minister in 2016. What is a digital minister and why was it urgently needed in Taiwan?
Back in 2014, when we peacefully occupied the parliament for 3 weeks, we call ourselves demonstrators, not just protesters, because protesters are against something. But we're not just about against the trade deal with Beijing, but rather we're demonstrating that it is possible for 500,000 people on the street and many more online to facilitate a conversation so that people come to common understanding and finally common values when it comes to the trade deal and how the trade deal needs to be structured. And after 3 weeks of peaceful conversation, the Speaker of the Parliament, Wang Jinping at the time, did agree on the consensus that we produced. And so a digital minister in Taiwan, digital means both the 数位 word is also plural. Right? So it's not just digital as in connecting machines to machines, but the pluralism of connecting people of different ideas together and heal polarization and also make sure that the trust that was lost a decade ago in 2014, when the trust level was at just 9%, we managed to rebuild it so that it was like 70% and nowadays like 60% or so that people of different stripes of ideologies and so on can connect on those online and hybrid platforms to come to common understanding.
And when you took this role, you told me during our previous call that you did not have a job description. How did you fix that?
I wrote a job description because I was the first digital minister to define what the plural vision of digital is. So it goes like this. When we see the Internet of Things, let's make it an Internet of beings. When we see virtual reality, let's make it a shared reality. When we see machine learning, let's make it collaborative learning. When we see user experience, let's make it about human experience. And whenever we hear that the singularity is near, let us always remember the plurality is here.
What were your goals when you took this role and did you achieve them?
The goal, again, is to heal a polarized society, is to radically trust the people, making the state transparent to citizens, not the other way around. And then some of people do trust back. And now looking back, I would say that nowadays, in terms of polarization, when it comes to like urban, rural, or different ethnicities, or across generations and so on, Taiwan stands as the least polarized nation. And according to the Human Index, we're also the most free in all of Asia. And according to the Democracy Index, also the most democratic in all of Asia. So we managed to heal polarization without stepping on the personal freedoms, without stepping on the democratic developments. And so I would say that, yes, we did accomplish what we set out to do a decade ago.
How did you get different stakeholders to trust this process and trust technology?
I think it is, as said in the Taoist scripture, to give no trust is to get no trust. So instead of asking people to blindly trust any sort of technology, we trust the people to use those civic technologies themselves. So we make sure that the technologies we use, such as the Polis platform, are open source. So people can set it up themselves, inspect the source code, inspect the data, and see how it works by themselves. And I also made sure that whenever we have a visit from a journalist, from a lobbyist, or even internal meetings that I chair, you can go to the sayit.archive.tw website and see thousands of the meetings that I chair, the meetings that I had with journalists and so on, and then see exactly what was said during those meetings. And so by radically trusting the people to share the how and why of policymaking, not just the what of policies made, people can then see exactly what's going on. And also lobbyists in that situation always lobby for the common good, for the future generation, for the sustainable development, because they know the future generation is watching.
Can you give us a couple of examples?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. So back in 2014, it was about the trade service agreement. But very quickly in 2015, there's a new wave of AI that is becoming part of our life. For example, Uber came to Taiwan, and using new dispatch algorithm is that, it's much more efficient, it saves time, and it's bypassing the existing taxi laws, but it's good for the society and so on. Of course, not many people embraced the entire argument that just because it's more efficient, it doesn't, cut the workers' dignity and underpay them when the supply is larger than the demand and so on. So there's a lot of debate around the world around that time, whether it's actually a sharing economy or just extractive gig economy. And so that was one of the polarized divides that we faced in 2015, along with many other countries. But unlike many other countries, we use the same bridge-making technology to invite the taxi drivers, the Uber drivers, the passengers, the people who care about the rural transportation and so on, all go to the same social media platform. So unlike the antisocial corner of social media, where it's very easy to get extreme voices going viral, going a lot of debates in the reply button, we built our own social media where there's no reply button. So you can see a fellow person's sentiment, like insurance is important and rural area must be served, not undercutting existing meters, but there's no reply button. You can upvote, you can downvote, you can see yourself, the avatar, moving toward the people who feel similarly. You can share your own feelings, but there's no way for a flame war to erupt. There's no way for trolls to take over the conversation. And after 3 weeks of online conversation, we very clearly see that there's a lot of bridge-making statements that heals the divide between those ideological polarized camps. And you can very easily see in a kind of group picture that most people agree with most of their neighbors on most of those points most of the time. And we say that the top 10 statements that talks across the different divides that has 85% or more consensus among all the different clusters of people, we hold ourselves to account by making sure that we ask Uber and taxi and so on, checking with them these common agenda that is set by the people and checking with them whether they want to commit to implementing such measures. And so Uber has now long been a valid, taxi fleet in Taiwan, but the rural areas are served by the co-ops and social entrepreneurs because we changed the law to take people's common ideas into account. So after that, a lot more people saw that, okay, it is possible to heal the divides, but not focusing on the one or two polarized arguments, but focusing on the common ground.
I'm curious how Uber may have responded if they had a country manager or brand manager who said, well, hold on a second. There's a lot of conversation where we're not necessarily involved. Did you have to bring them in and build some coalition or invite them to speak?
Because it's open data, right? This entire conversation is public. And so Uber actually did at the time provided their own analysis on the police conversation. So they were included from day one. And after the consultation, they did visit me when I started serving as digital minister. David Plouffe was the person speaking on behalf of Uber. And you can still now go to YouTube and check the 360 recording, like a virtual reality immersive reenactment of what exactly he said in response to that consultation. So I think the great thing of radical transparency is that people can, of course, lobby, people can offer their own interpretations, but they always have to do so in a kind of public eye. And then the arguments become the materials for the next round of conversation, So there's less kind of flip-flopping, but rather a continued corrective course when people can see that this argument needs extra context and so on. They can do that, but they cannot kind of go back and erase in time the conversation that have taken place.
Interesting. Thank you. For those of us who might be wondering, are you one of many digital ministers? Do you have peers? Do you convene with them?
Yeah, so nowadays around the world, there are more and more ministers of digital affairs. In 2022, Japan had a digital agency, and they also have cabinet ministers in charge of digital agency, digital transformation. I think after the pandemic, many more countries see the ability for digital to connect the previously kind of siloed sources of, like in the pandemic, we had to use open data to visualize the availability of masks, the contact tracing, the vaccination, and all of these things. They used to belong to very different departments, different ministries, but because an integrated circuit makes this response much more easy. And so right after the pandemic in Taiwan in 2022, we also set up the Ministry of Digital Affairs. So for the first 6 years in my service in the cabinet, I was digital minister without portfolio, meaning that I work with dispatches from different ministries in my office in a more horizontal setting. But starting 2022, we then migrated toward a new ministry that brings all the teams that work closely with me during the pandemic together into an integrated circuit.
And so were you in a position then to implement or suggest new policies and
definitely.
regulations? Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Can you give us a couple of examples?
Sure, of course. For example, recently we saw AI and its ability to have deepfakes. And the deepfakes is first used massively on social media platforms to post advertisement of scams, right? You see a lot of celebrities talking in videos and it looks very real, selling you some crypto or things like that. And that has become a large problem, not just in Taiwan, but in all the different places, right? So again, we had a very similar conversation like the police conversation around Uber, but this time we sent 200,000 text messages to random numbers in SMS. And again, asking us a very simple question, how do you feel about this new threat to information integrity online? And so again, people share their feelings. But this time around, we say, okay, and by the way, would you be able to dedicate a long afternoon, almost an entire day's time, to have an online conversation with 9 fellow citizens to deliberate on the feelings that you share about information integrity. And many people volunteered. And then we use random stratified sampling, like a rigorous poll, to choose randomly 450 people that are a microcosm of the Taiwanese society. And then in 45 rooms of 10 each, they went through all these different kind of proposals of how to contain the deepfake problem on social media. So it is not a top-down thing of a minister trying to fix all the problems by limiting social media, but rather people brainstorming on their collective intelligence to figure out, for example, that people said that if, say, a social media posts a advertisement of Elon Musk, selling crypto or things like that, then the social media need to secure the digital signature of Elon Musk himself authorizing this advertisement. And if the social media like Facebook doesn't do that and then air these advertisements to a Taiwanese population and somebody get conned for $1 million, then Facebook should be liable for that $1 million because people say if you're just issuing a fine, Facebook will just pay off the fine. But only when they assume full liability would they really change the algorithm to do proper KYC on those, know your customer on that advertisements. And so that's just one of the ideas. Yeah. And so of all those ideas that bridges across the device and get 85% support post-deliberation, we again just checked with YouTube, with Facebook, with the usual suspects, whether it's feasible and whether they can change it. They're like, yeah, it's just expensive. We can, of course, do that. And then that was in March 2024. And in May, that already became a draft law. And now it's just law. In September, everybody changed their code so that when they air such advertisement to the Taiwanese people, they now have to secure digital signature or KYC. So that is just one example of a very quick, rapid response to a new threat that is caused by AI. But the solution is not like the state trying to grab more powers, but the citizens coming together to figure out a very sensible solution.
So if you're in the United States and you've worked in Silicon Valley, what advice would you have for maybe policymakers as they grapple with regulation? Because so far, it's up in the air.
Yeah, I think for a lot of those downstream harms, like deepfakes and so on, we're now already seeing quite good examples of laws on the state level. So if you can just take those state level ideas and laws and make sure that on the federal level, there's a kind of conversation of the best practices, basically, I would much more advise this kind of specific harm reduction, mitigation, and liability laws instead of just trying to say we anticipate all the potential harms of AI. It's much easier if you have this kind of like alignment assembly where you can just periodically poll people on a deliberation, asking what new harms do you see from AI? And then on the federal level, then there could be a very quick response that says, okay, now we see this new harm coming, and maybe we should assign new liability to the companies that are making applications and so on that causes those harms, and then very quickly add that to the liability scheme. I think the rule of the road is much easier if people can, for each like accident and things like that, then come up with seatbelts and things like that. And that is common sense, of course, but it's much better than predicting how cars will look like 10 years from now.
No, thank you so much. So democracy is facing unprecedented challenges today. Many groups are using digital tools, as we've been talking about, to destabilize free and open societies. You took this issue on in your 2022 book, Plurality, with economist Glenn Weil, and 100 online collaborators, if I got that right. And you've noted that technology and democracy are in conflict in most liberal democracies. What do you want to emphasize to Harvard Business School faculty, academics, researchers, media, and CEOs at large?
Yeah. I think the core idea of plurality is that when you see conflict and polarization, you don't have to see it like fire on the ground, you have to put it down or things like that, but rather you can harness the energy. You can drill and see the oil under the fire on the ground and see it as opportunities for co-creation. For if you make the spaces, the kind of pro-social media, the kind of bridge-making, like polis-like systems, a reality, then when people enter that sort of conversation, again, maybe with very polarized ideas in mind, they can nevertheless focus on the practical instruments of common values. Like in the Uber case, the common value was that it needs to serve rural areas, not undercutting existing meters and so on. So focus on the specific overlapping consensus can very effectively not just diffuse the polarization, but also build the relationship, the civic muscles that let then the stakeholders see that there's much more in common than we assumed the first time around. And if you build such safe spaces for people to then enter again and again, and if through citizens' initiatives, you can set those topics by your stakeholders, not necessarily by ministers, but people like in Taiwan, 5,000 people joining a signature online can kind of force this kind of conversation on a national scale, then you get into a habit of a high frequency, low latency democracy, where people can feel that, yeah, they have much more agency when it comes to setting the agenda of their polity. And then the polarization will become much lower.
So what do you say to people who might argue against a more technology-enabled democracy?
Yeah, I would say that democracy itself is a technology, right? It's a set of technologies that no matter whether it's voting, whether it's referenda, whether it's participatory budgeting, I mean, these are already technologies. What we need to think of is a higher bandwidth democracy. Instead of waiting for 4 years and just voting among like a set of 4 candidates, this is what, 2 bits every 4 years, we need to work on a higher bandwidth democracy. Now, there are valid concerns, like if there's still people without internet connectivity, then maybe that would be leaving them behind. So you need to, of course, work on, like in Taiwan, broadband as human right. No matter how remote they are, no matter how high they are in the mountains, almost 4,000 meters high, in Taiwan's highest peak, you're guaranteed to have 10 megabits per second both ways in just $15 per month for unlimited data. And that sort of policy, the universal broadband, the data and digital competence in basic education and so on, that's the basics. So you have to have the essentials before moving on to digital democracy.
In your presentation with Harvard Business School faculty, you talked about competence. Can you elaborate a little bit? Because I'm wondering, what role do you think education should play in preparing citizens for an AI-driven society?
You mentioned the word competence. That in the Taiwan curriculum is, in 2019, the new word that we use in place of literacy. So we used to say that you need media literacy, data literacy, digital literacy, but literacy is only when you consume information. But competence is when you contribute into the co-production of information. Because nowadays, it is not just the standardized answers that prepare people to a ever-emerging, changing world. If you just show the students the fact-checked results of the journalists' investigations and so on, it doesn't really prepare their mind against the polarization, the manipulation, the extremism online. But if the students have gone through the fact-finding journey themselves, setting up these air boxes that measure the air pollution levels so that they know exactly what's going on when it comes to the community levels of air pollution and water pollution, or if they fact-check themselves the presidential candidates as they're having a debate and see their name on national live streaming and so on, if they contribute to the journey of fact-finding, then that is competence. They contribute to the common understanding of what's actually going on, and this journey prepares their mind against the assault of polarization and manipulation and so on, and then they can then see, like, even people with different ideas, different ideological camps, they're just one of the sources, they can see stereoscopically. So competence contributing to the commons, I think that is one of the most powerful things we can prepare our younger generation against a media environment that is defined by polarization.
It sort of turns on its head what you think of right now with today's youth and how they engage with technology. I've raised 2 kids, and it's been tough to watch sometimes. So in the United States, November is being hailed as the USA's first AI election. AI tools have begun to play a significant role in campaign strategies, voter outreach, misinformation, misinformation detection. You recently did a talk at the Aspen Ideas Festival about elections focusing on pre-bunking, making people, they can see through, they can understand there's a deep fake by assuming everything is fake. How effective is this? What do you think?
Well, yeah. So I think 2 years ago, when I deepfake myself, asking an actor to play me and show exactly how a deepfake is produced, at that time it requires like 20 hours or so to have a kind of voice clone and image clone of myself. But we say very clearly that soon it will just be 20 minutes, 20 seconds, 20 milliseconds. And at that point, anyone will be able to wear anyone's likeness and speak in that person's voice and so on. And it was very well received. Like when people see how easy it is to deepfake anyone, then they don't assume anything is true simply because it looks like true. They would insist to check its sources, where it comes from. Again, the digital signatures, the KYC, that helps. Like when we sent the SMS text messages to 200,000 random numbers, it came from 111, which is the trusted number. So just by looking at the sender's number alone, you can see that, oh, it comes from a trusted source. So moving from the content level detection back to the actor level, to the source level detection. I think that is key when now anyone can deepfake anyone in this AI middled world. So that is one. And the other thing is that we already knew going into election, there will be deepfake videos accusing of election rigging on the counting mechanism, because already people know that if you decimate the trust in democratic processes and let people fight against each other about the outcome of election, that is one of the most sure way to decimate people's trust in democratic institutions. So we already knew that there's going to be that sort of attack. And again, we asked people of all 3 major different parties to come to the counting stations. We use paper-only ballots so they can keep high definition video of the entire counting process. So when predictably there was deepfake videos accusing of miscounts and so on, we can just go back to that counting station and ask all the 3 different parties and to contribute their video recordings, and we can replay. And actually, for most people, they see those pre-bunking way before they see this deepfaked attacks. And so again, it inoculates their mind, and they can see that actually, regardless of which party they support, there's no such rigging going on. And all the 3 party leaders came out and said, yeah, there's no such rigging going on. So again, by anticipating what attack is going on and letting people know that that these attacks are coming, it inoculates their minds against such polarization effects.
If you were digital minister for the United States today, what one or two strategies would you deploy right now?
Yeah, so again, one of the sure things is pre-bunking, and the other thing is like rapid response to the trending rumors. In Taiwan, we have a collaborative fact-checking network built by the civil society called CoFacts, and anyone can just long press any rumor that they receive and report that into a shared dashboard. And so we can very easily see what are trending right now, what kind of rumors and mis and disinformation are trending. And now the CoFacts community works with language models with AI so that AI is able then to compare a incoming trending rumor with all the debunk and pre-bunk rumors before and offer this kind of first take that can then inform the citizenry to be not taken away by the initial assault, right? So this kind of debunk bot is also available in the US. So I would advise that people try it out at debunkbot.com.
Debunkbot.com.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And enter your favorite conspiracy theories and pre-bunk it.
Thank you. Okay, role of AI in business. I mean, there are a million questions I can ask you, but what obligations do you think businesses that build and operate large AI models have, as well as the businesses that deploy these models in their operations?
Sure. I think the most important thing of those large language models is that they can actually be tuned to fit into particular social roles. It is a very different thing if you want to deploy a language model in a kind of assistive role, like summarizing meetings and so on. But it's very different if you want to deploy it in order to make business decisions. These are fundamentally different roles. And in different roles, you have different social expectations, different code of conduct, and so on. So just as we would, tell our assistants, like this is your expected role in the business and so on, so would we need to describe such code of conducts for AI agents and assistants in particular business roles. And so for many of those large language models, there are already ways to describe what OpenAI calls as model specification, or what Anthropic describes as constitution of those AI models. And so if your business have your own different HR policies, code of conduct, ways to interact with stakeholders, and so on, you need to be able to steer those AI models so that it fits the role that you want AI agents or assistants to play within your business, instead of just what the off-the-shelf default configuration is. So this steerability, this ability to tune and train your local community models, I think that is the main responsibility for those large AI model makers to offer to the downstream people deploying it, and also for the downstream people who may deploy those AI systems initially to cause bias, harm, and so on, for people who are affected by those AI systems to then go back to steer those AI models toward a even more evolved version of the conduct or the model spec.
Thank you. Thank you. I thought we'd dial it back to regulation a little bit. When OpenAI CEO Sam Altman came to campus in May, he spoke to us about the role of regulation, how regulation shouldn't be up to people like him. Most business people think about regulatory powers of government as having the potential to save us from the worst excesses of this new technology. Would you try to align Taiwan's regulatory framework with GDPR and new European Union's AI regulations, or have you worked with other countries in ways that we could learn?
Yeah, definitely. In Taiwan, we have a GDPR compliant privacy law, and we have an independent data protection authority, the DPA. So it's very European standard. And so I think one of the most core ideas is that there's no AI exceptionalism, in the sense that if there are existing laws that requires accountability, explainability, transparency, and so on from computing systems, it's not just saying that if it's AI, it's machine learning, it's an opaque black box, so we make exceptions so they don't have to fulfill the same duties. If we demand the same algorithmic transparency and accountability to non-AI systems, and now AI systems play those roles, we need to demand the same of AI systems. Now, whether it's technologically feasible for them to provide this kind of explanation or transcript and so on, well, that is the business of the AI makers. They need to invest in the ability for AI to be interpretable, to be explainable. And as I mentioned, if there's downstream harm, for those downstream harm to then make concrete steerability corrections on the upstream. And all these need to apply, not just to AI, but to any computing systems. So I think in Taiwan, we are now also working on a basic AI Act. And I think the consensus of not just ministries, but also civil society is that it's not a carve out for AI systems, but it's a way to instruct the businesses when they're deploying AI system to fit within the existing societal norms.
Thank you. What are your views on the role business can play in creating regulation without attempting regulatory capture?
Yeah, so a lot of the frontier AI labs are already saying quite publicly that they are doing the harm monitoring, they're doing the evaluation of the capabilities of whether their AI models can cause downstream harm when it comes to cyber or the other, bio, nuclear, and so on, other areas and so on. So I think just the transparency of their making this kind of assessment, making sure that across the industry, people are using comparable metrics to do such evaluation, that is very useful already. And then if enough of the industry, of the frontier AI labs start doing the same, then maybe it does make sense to then say is now the kind of basic bar that they then have to show the world, the society, or the state that they are now doing what they promised to do. Their self-regulation can then be part of the state regulation or the federal level regulation. And then after a while, then we can raise the bar a little bit and say, if you're a frontier lab and you say you're doing this, then if you're not doing that, then maybe you should assume liability to the harm that is caused downstream.
Thank you. Thank you. So it seems like you're on a mission to change the narrative also of technology and social media. Yep. You're an optimist. And certainly there are no shortages of conflicts right now when we look at technology. You coined the term pro-social media. Please tell us about it.
Sure. So pro-social media is the kind of social media that amplifies the bridges, the things that are common ground, even despite the polarization. So it's unlike the antisocial corners of social media that only prioritizes addiction or engagement, which tends to be the more extreme voices, the voices that distracts ourselves from the ability to form meaningful bridges across ideological camps. And so in terms of bridging systems, there are many different ways. I described polis, which is the system that relies on the upvotes and the downvotes, and for people to come to a common understanding so that if the statement convinces people who usually don't agree with each other, then it's bridging those two different groups. And so you can measure a statement on its bridging potential. The higher the potential is, the wider the gap it managed to bring to the common ground. So like in Twitter, x.com, the community nodes system already uses this bridging algorithm to show the nodes that add to the context of a trending Twitter x.com post that can broadly speak to people of different ideological camps. YouTube now also have a very similar community nodes algorithm. And going forward, you can also think of ways to analyze from the context of that statement, whether it's likely to speak to people of different ideological inclinations. The Google Jigsaw unit has the Perspectives API that can analyze a content and see the potential of bridge making, whether constructiveness of it or the curiosity, affinity, personal story, and so on, how likely it is to speak across those divides. And then you can imagine new kinds of social media that sorts by this kind of characteristics so that you see the ones that are most depolarizing instead of the ones that are most polarizing, right? So at the moment, there's already multiple teams prototyping such pro-social media. And nowadays, we're also seeing like Project Liberty trying to put a people's bid to buy TikTok US and switch its default algorithm to such pro-social bridge-making algorithms. And the hope is that we can then demonstrate that it doesn't decrease engagement. People are still willing to spend time on such spaces, but as they spend more time, they build more bridges across their communities.
Did you achieve this in Taiwan?
Yeah, so the police algorithm is used in Taiwan to heal the divides. And the joint platform, which is the institutionalized public participation platform, also uses a similar algorithm.
Thank you. With the rise of AI in content moderation and personalization, how do you see it in enabling or transforming pro-social media?
Yeah, so nowadays, you don't need to program Python or to write programs. You can simply say to your AI model that I would like more, long form videos. I would like to see more like curiosity. I would like to see this and that. And once a community speak their preferences to a community model, it can produce a set of constitution or the common understanding of this community, and then you can subscribe to each other's preferences. And by just modifying a few words, you can then say, I would like my feed to look more like this and more like that. And so all this, it doesn't require programming capability anymore. People can very easily then customize the recommendation engines to amplify the kind of vibes they want to get. And I think this is a very good thing because previously, it is very opaque how those sorting recommendation engine works. But if people can very clearly see the model specifications, the constitution that drives the logic, and that it's editable, you can just like a Google Doc, start editing it and change how it works. Then it ceases to be a black box and people become, again, a part of the steering wheel when it comes to recommendation algorithms and the logic that affects our information diet.
How important is it for journalists to understand what's happening right now, to maybe spread the word, maybe have these debates in the public media?
Yeah, I think it is quite important to understand that social media is not necessarily all the same. It's not necessarily all black box. It's not necessarily all opaque. And just as we have seen in Europe with the Digital Markets Act, you're not trapped within, say, WhatsApp or a messaging system. They are now mandating the interoperability so that you can use one messaging system, but send a message toward a different messaging system. And like iMessage now interoperates with the Android messaging system and so on. So again, you're not trapped within a certain silo. So one can easily imagine the same for social media. Currently, if you post on TikTok, you can only view on TikTok. But like other podcast platforms, you can post on one podcast platform, but listen with another podcast application. So think about a potential future where social medias are also mandated to be interoperable so that when you post on TikTok, you can curate in other ways. And then there will be a vibrant market of alternate recommendation engines, alternate curations, and so on. So people are not trapped into one single logic of the place where they post those media. And that is, I think, also possible for people to imagine such a future, and journalists can help with that imagination.
Interesting. What headlines would you be looking for, or what headlines do you envision we'll be seeing in 2050 about this topic?
In 2050?
2050.
I think by 2050, people would not say technology-mediated or technology-assisted democracy, right? It would just be taken for granted that democracy is not something that is set in stone, but people can co-create like any social technology and steer it wherever we want. And also that the decision-making structures will be much more fluid in the sense that instead of waiting for 4 years to vote for like a few candidates or a few referendum topics. There will be a continuous conversation, continuous integration of people's preferences and so on, so that whenever we face new emerging issues, emerging threats, and so on, we can just very quickly come to a conversation. And maybe with immersive shared reality, the distance is no longer a problem. So even for place-based issues, we can just immerse ourselves in that place and have a conversation in the here and now and come to a collective decision about things. So I would say that in 2050, people would stop making arbitrary distinctions between the in-person conversations and online conversations. It would just feel like a continuum where people can be embodied as much as they want and come to collective conversations about a place, about a common topic, and so on.
Interesting. Thank you. And lastly, you're having conversations all around the world on these topics. How much would you say business leaders care about AI-enabled or tech-enabled democracy and democracy in general?
Yeah, I think for business leaders, we all have a way to have a conversation with our customers, maybe through representative, maybe through feedback forms, and so on. But I think more and more, the customers are also talking among themselves. So the same kind of technology-enabled deliberation can be used as a way to have a survey of where your product is going, where your service is going, but instead of just in limited focus groups or in one-on-one conversation or feedback forms, to invite your customers as co-creators. And we're now more and more seeing this kind of conversation tools to free up the conversation such that if your business provides a certain service or product, the future of that product or service, the branding of it, the vibe of it, the marketing material of it, the extension of it, the mod or modification of it, and so on, there could be this new prosumer community that then take your offering and make like second order creations out of it, kind of like co-creators and not just your consumers. And so to foster the community, you can use more or less the same tools as tech-enabled democracy to enable this kind of co-creative communities around your branding, around your product and your services.
Interesting. Thank you.